Welcome to Tour with the Roses. Today we're going to take you to an exciting place. Again, we're taking you to places that are off the beaten path for the most part, and today is really off the beaten path. I don't know of any tour groups who've ever gone to Ebenezer or Even HaEzer. This is an exciting place if you want to connect the Bible to the land and show the history of events that happened. And today we're going to discuss this place and how it gets its name. But to begin with, let's start by reading an important passage that helps start our story. We're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 7. Starting in verse 7 of chapter 7, we read, Now when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mitzpeh, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. So Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines, and threw them into confusion, and they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mitzpeh, and pursued the Philistines, and struck them, as far as below Beit-Kar. Then Samuel took a stone, and set it up between Mitzpeh and Shen, and he called its name Even HaEzer, or Ebenezer. For he said, Till now the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and did not again enter the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. So the place where the stone was put by Samuel in chapter 7 was called from that point on Even HaEzer, or Ebenezer, and we come across it earlier in chapter 4. We're going to turn our attention to chapter 4 and look at that, but it's worth pointing out that obviously this chapter 4 was written after these events took place, and that's why it's referred to that way. Looking at verse 1 of chapter 4, it says, And the word of the Lord came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer, that's in Hebrew, Even HaEzer. And the Philistines encamped at Afek. And these are the two places we're going to look at today. Of course, many of you know the story. They fought, they lost the Ark of the Covenant, which then ended up in the hands of the Philistines until eventually it went to Kiryat Yearim. We're calling this tour Samuel's Stone, but we didn't actually find Samuel's Stone. And there could be a couple reasons why we haven't. First of all, the site has not actually been excavated a lot. And in archaeology, they generally don't want to excavate more than 20% of a site, and this site is far less than that. So that's one reason. But the most likely reason that we haven't found Samuel's Stone is that we have precedent in Scripture of things like this being misused and then removed. For example, in the story of Gideon, we have Gideon, after his battle, created an ephod, which was then worshipped as a god. And we also have sites like in Tel Arad, the Arad Israelite fortress, where we have standing stones, which might have been very similar to the Samuel stone that we're looking for here, and in which case we know that they actually worshipped it as a god. So this might be why we didn't find the stone. So now that we're done with the introduction, we're going to take you directly to the site. Welcome to Even HaEzer. Okay, so hidden in the neighborhood, just where most people wouldn't even think to look, is part of the story of the prophet Samuel. We read in 1 Samuel chapter 4 the story of how there was a battle, and the children of Israel took the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, and they took it to a place called Even HaEzer, or Ebenezer in some of your Bibles. Let's go find it.
Okay, so here we are at a site hidden back in this neighborhood between a main road and this neighborhood, a place that's called Izbet Zauta, or Zauta. We um, don't call it the name Even HaEzer because it's not 100% sure that it's here, but it's, let's say, very, very likely. Izbet means a temporary village, and Salta means, Sarta is the name of the village. And this was common during the Ottoman period. Entire villages would relocate for the summer to their temporary villages, so they would come down from the mountains and be closer to the sea in order to grow things that grow better in soil here. So this was a temporary dwelling during the Ottoman period. That's where the name comes from. And as you can see from our location, we are right here, and not far away is Afek. Now this is in the Bible. When we read from the book of 1 Samuel, we can see that the Philistines encamped at Afek, and the Israelites encamped at Ebenezer, Even HaEzer. Now, why do they think this is Even HaEzer? Because we have several main roads in Israel, local roads and national roads, as well as international roads, and all of them sort of converge right here in this area. This whole area right here on the map, where between Afek and Even HaEzer, is called the Afek Pass. It's called that in a lot of extra biblical literature, as well as in the Bible. The Afek Pass was a well-known pass along the Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea, a major international road. And there was a river here called the Arcone River, and it starts at Afek. And as a result of that, river flowing this way, it made it very difficult and swampy to pass this way, so that people would always want to pass between these two spots. So there's a low area here, sort of a valley between where the mountains are and the hill where Afek is, and that's where most people who are on an international route would pass by here. And because also of the local roads, which I'll explain later, we're fairly certain that this is the location of Even HaEzer, and I'll give you more proof as we walk over towards this ruin over here.
So now we're going to head over to this 4-room house. There are a few structures here. This is a common structure during this period of time, but this one is spectacularly large by comparison, and so the archaeologists have preserved it for us. Also at the site, they found what's called an ostracon, which is a piece of broken clay that was used for writing, and it is one of the earliest pieces of writing that we found in the land of Israel. It fits well within the time frame of this site, which was from 1200 to 1000 BC, so before the time of King David. This site was occupied, and it was occupied only by Israelites. So as we go inside the site, I'm going to explain what a 4-room house is.
And this was the door. There was also some kind of a courtyard out on the outside, and the family would live inside the house, where there are 4 rooms. This would be the entry, or the living room. You can still see some of the stones that would have been the bases for pillars, which would have probably held up a second floor or a loft. You have one room here, which was probably either for storage or possibly for sleeping. And you have another room here and another room here. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then the main living room, 4 rooms. And often what would happen is the children would sleep on the lower floor, and then there was always a second level or a loft level. At least one of the rooms was a loft room where the parents would sleep above them. And this is what the archaeologists found here. Some of it's been partially rebuilt, but for the most part, we're looking at the original stones of this 4-room house. And just to clarify, these were made of unhewn stones, which was the technology in the time of 1 Samuel. And they would have then built a wooden structure on top and a wooden roof. And the second level would have probably also been wood, and using probably a wooden beam. A sycamore tree was usually used for these pillars, because they're the straightest tree trunks that we have native to the land of Israel. And they would also have used them as cross beams on the roof. Okay, I'm going to point out a couple more things. If you just walk outside the house with me.
So I'm going to take you outside where we're going to see something that's extremely unique to the Israelite culture, meaning it wasn't found in other cultures in the land.
So here we have several grain pits. These were used to store their grain and keep it safe from insects and whatnot. They were almost certainly covered. And we have several of them here. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think there's more. Um, here's one that hasn't been excavated. 8, 9, 9 grain pits. So this was probably a fairly active family, and this just attests to the fact that this was an Israelite community here. Now, other structures, other things were found. Of course, they were buried. That's just the way we preserve archaeology in Israel. We write it up so we know what's here, and then it's covered over to preserve it. Now, what's interesting about this story is that this particular town was occupied until Afek was conquered by the Israelites. When Afek was conquered by the Israelites, this town was completely abandoned, and the Israelites moved into Afek. Maybe the same population, maybe not, but Afek is a better place. We're going to go there, and I'm going to show you why Afek is a better place to live than Even. In the ancient world, there were two international highways: the Via Maris, the way by the sea, which traveled along the coastal plain, and the King's Highway, which traveled along the mountain ridges of Jordan. But here in the land of Israel, there's also a major local highway, which was called the Patriarch's Route, which traveled also along the ridges of the mountain. And if we look at where the Israelites were encamped in the Shiloh area, there's also a local route which traveled all the way across the mountains to this coastal plain right here. And that route is probably the fastest and easiest way to cut across in ancient times from the Jordan River all the way through the mountains, all the way to the coastal plain, which is most likely the route that they took when they brought the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, traveling up the Patriarch's Road a little bit, and then across on that major route to Even HaEzer, to this place right here. Why? Because this is the best hill to overlook Afek, which we can see in the distance, though maybe not very well in our camera. We can see it with our eyes in the distance. Afek is just right across the way, about 2 miles away from here, and it's the next hill over. And there's just a valley in between. So if you're going to stage an attack between two armies, this is where you would want to camp, because you can see really easily all the way around for miles and miles in the distance. And that's why archaeologists say that this is Even HaEzer.
So the prophet Samuel chose to memorialize this place with a stone to remind our people to trust in the Lord.
Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. פתח אל אדוני בכל ליבך ואל בינתך אל תישען בכל דרכך דעהו והוא יישאר אורחותיך.
Now we're headed to Afek, and the first thing you're going to notice is that it is a land with rich resources.
Okay, so we're now entering the fortress built by the Ottomans. And what's special about this fortress is the location along the Via Maris. It's always been populated from the Bronze Age. And if you look around, we can still see a lot of these inner cores are still standing, but many of the building stones, the exterior stones that protected the city walls or the fortress walls here, have been stolen or repurposed for other usage. So it gives you an idea that the walls you're seeing were double or triple the thickness of what's standing now, where you can just see the loose cores. I also want to go to this window and point out where we are in relation to this area and why it was so significant. Along the Via Maris, there were several way stations because people would travel with their caravans of camels, usually 7 or 14 kilometers a day, and they would need to stop to rewater their camels and restock supplies, feed the camels. So there's all these villages and way stations along the way, Afek being one of the main ones in this area, because it had both the hill that it's built on, which gave it a great view, a way to protect itself from around, and also there was the ability to have fresh water here because of the spring of the Arcone River. The Arcone River starts here and goes all the way out to the sea. So if you're traveling with a caravan, you are going to want to take the easiest route, and crossing the river is not the easiest route. So you want to start at the headwaters of the river, which is this spring. And where do these waters come from? If you look out this window here, you'll see some mountains in the distance, maybe not that easily. These are the mountains of Judea and Samaria. About 2.5 miles away, you can see the mountains starting to climb off in the distance. And when the rainwaters land on those mountains, it drips down into the aquifer. And the aquifer breaks right here, and that's why we have the spring of the Arcone River, which then flows out to the sea. So why did the Philistines take this area? There was already an Egyptian presence here. This is an Egyptian governor's mansion that was built on a fortress that was already here when the Philistines came. The Philistines came actually from the Mediterranean islands. And they came, when they came, they brought with them technology called iron. And they brought the Iron Age to the land of Israel with them. They actually fought, well, the sea people fought with the Egyptians in Egypt, and they fought along the coast. The Egyptians were able to kick them out of Egypt, but they weren't allowed to kick them out of the coast. And so the Egyptians lost all this territory to these Philistines. And they brought with them the Iron Age into Israel and were able to subjugate all the people groups around. And that helped them to conquer this area. And of course, at the time, Israel was divided into 12 different tribes. Each tribe tried to defend itself. There was no unified king over them. So it was fairly easy for the Philistines to subjugate them. And then we get to the book of 1 Samuel, and they tried to unify themselves against the Philistines, and they lost. Why did they lose? We talked about Ebenezer or Even HaEzer, because they did it not in the way that God planned, not according to God's guidance. They tried to do it on their own. They tried to follow the customs of the pagan culture that was around them. So we were in the ruin, exposed to the sun, because it's a ruin and the roof is missing. And now we're outside under the shade of a carob tree. And the carob tree was actually brought via travelers on the Via Maris. They didn't have beef jerky apparently back in those days, so they used this carob as a snack food. They just dry on the tree, and you can take it with you, and it's kind of sweet, tastes a little bit sort of like chocolate. And inside are these seeds that are too hard to eat, and so they would just spit them out along the path. So it's actually because of the carob seeds that we get the term carat as a measurement for the size or the weight of different things like diamonds, for example. The root of that measurement comes from these carob pods, and we can thank the travelers of the Via Maris for introducing this to the world. So even during the time of Jesus, this city was still important. By that time, it had been taken over by the Israelites, and during the time of King Herod, in order to honor his father, he rebuilt this small village. At the time, it was a small village, and turned it into a major center. What we're standing on right now is actually a Roman road. It's a little bit after the time of King Herod. It's been renovated. King Herod's road is actually underneath. And we are walking on an ancient Roman road, and this dates back, the road itself and this city date back to the time of Jesus. And as we walk on this road, I want to show you something special that they found along this road. I just want to point out this Ottoman building here, this tower of this Ottoman fortress was not here in the Roman period. This was the entrance to the city. This road was called a Dokumanos, or an east-west road, and it was one of the major east-west roads in a Roman city. Here where there was a Roman forum, a square, a market where they would buy and sell goods. All this was discovered by the archaeologists, although most of it was then covered up. So it's under the surface. And now we're going to walk east, and I'm going to show you something really amazing that's along this road. Okay, so this is a late Roman road. We know it's a late Roman road because Roman roads in the late period, they started building them at an angle, because when the chariots go by, it does less damage to the roads if they put the stones in at an angle. And here we can see marks on these paving stones, and these marks are actually left by Roman chariots. You see, they're just carved out by years and years of use of chariots riding over these roads, which is why they had to repave them from time to time. That's why we don't see the original Herodian road anymore, is because these chariots or wagons or whatever it was that was being pulled by some animal, eventually were able to carve these gaps into the rock. So here I'm putting my hand back into the late Roman period. Isn't that neat? Okay, so we're still walking along the Roman road, and here we're going to find something very special. Just off the side of the road, we find a small theater called an Odeon. This is from the Roman period. Look how beautifully preserved it is. Now, there actually aren't that many seats, and it looks like it wasn't all the way finished, but it gives you a great idea of how they built theaters in the ancient world. It wasn't just a platform and people stood on. It was a platform with rooms underneath. So you would say there's, instead of being backstage, there was understage. And people could pop out onto the main stage. There would usually be a back wall right here that would go very, very high. And there would be people coming in at different points along that back wall. Because there are lots of stages, there's lots of doors, there's lots of entrances to enter the stage and then come down or from the sides. And here the seating is really limited. So they think that this was probably not finished. It was an unfinished Odeon. Or else, I guess it could be that it was finished and the stones were repurposed. It's also possible. What's also special about it is that it has this gap in the floor. But you found the entrance to here? Mm-hmm. So then maybe people would be able to pop out into this area from this, and it's a doorway. One of the other things that's interesting here is that there's a doorway or a hatch here. And Shimon found the other side of the hatch. I hope he's not crawling inside the tunnel. There's a hatch from under the stage here, and then it comes out here. So somehow the actors had these sort of hidden trap doors or different exit points where they could perform in front of the live audience here. Usually the first row, by the way, was reserved for special people who were the wealthy or the royal people. They would sit on these special seats. Often you even found armrests, whereas other people just had just bench seating. These people would often have armchairs for some of them. Really, the wealthy class would sit in the front row and get a great view of everything in the theater right here in the front row. And there would normally be several different rows of seats going up. Now this Odeon is not in use, and you can see they're trying to preserve what is here by covering it with straw. But it gives us a great idea of what all the effort that they went through in a small city like this. Now it wasn't called Afek in the Roman period. It was called Antipatris after Antipater, who was Herod's father. So he renamed the city Antipatris in honor of his father, who you may or may not remember saved Julius Caesar in Egypt when he and Cleopatra were surrounded by Cleopatra's brother. They were under siege in the city. And it was Antipater and his army forces that he took from here that actually rescued Julius Caesar. You may or may not know that history. But anyway, for that reason, he was highly regarded in Rome and well respected, and it makes sense that they would name a city after him.
So our journey today from Even HaEzer to Afek reminds us of how important it is to follow God's way of doing things. The children of Israel lost 34,000 people, soldiers, fighting the Philistines the wrong way. But it only took one small prayer from a righteous man and the humility of the people in order to win the battle and eventually conquer this beautiful place of Afek. And so how important is it for us also to remember to follow God's way rather than our own, or follow the pagan customs that may be surrounding us. It's important for us to remember that God has a different standard for our lives, and we need to always trust in Him. And when we do, things will go well for us, because God wants the best for us in our lives.
Thank you for coming with us.
Yes, thank you again for coming with us on this edition of Tour with the Roses. Please feel free also to go to the chosenpeople.com website /Jason Rose and learn more about our ministry and how you can be a part by praying for us. Thank you. See you next time.